Yevamos Daf Chav Ches works through the Mishnah, which is the first in the parak discussing the case of the four brothers. The Gemara will have several questions on the Mishnah, some questioning the halacha and others questioning why it needs to be listed. And then the Gemara will get into another sugya later in the daf, and we'll conclude with a Mishnah close to the end of the daf. So first of all, let's review the case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah had four brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, perhaps Rachel and Leah. Reuven and Shimon both die, and those two sisters fall to Yibum, to Levi and Yehuda. So the Mishnah says a number of cases. The primary halacha that the Mishnah says is that neither one is allowed to do Yibum, because both sisters are falling to Yibum to both of them, and therefore each woman who's falling to Yibum is the sister of another woman who's falling to Yibum. She's a sister of a Zikuka. Both are Achos Zikuka, so therefore both men cannot do Yibum. They have to do Chalitza because they're Achos Zikuka. Now the Gemara has a problem with this. And the problem is that we've seen halacha that Rav Yochanan and Rav both agree to, which is that if a woman is mutter to do Yibum, and then she becomes usher to do Yibum, and then that Isser goes away, she should go back to the original heter, since she started off mutter. Even though she had a period of Isser in the middle, she can go back to the original heter. Now in this case, the first woman who fell to Yibum, the wife of the first brother to die, that is the wife of Reuven, she started off mutter, because when her husband died, she was not an achos zikuka, so her sister was not a skuka, she was mutter to do Yibum. Then, when Shimon died, Shimon's wife was her sister, then she became an achos zikuka. Now, if somebody were to go and do chalitza to Shimon's wife first, because that is what you're supposed to do, then there would no longer be a zika to Shimon's wife. That means that Reuven's wife would be back to being mutter. She's no longer an achos zikukaso. There is no longer any zika connection at all. So the other brother, the one who didn't do the chalitza, let's say Levi did the chalitza, so Yehuda should be able to do Yibum to Reuven's wife, who fell to Yibum first, because she started off mutter until Shimon's wife until Shimon died, and she went back to being mutter when Shimon's wife got chalitza from Levi. So what's the problem? So the Gemara said that Rav Yochanan said that he doesn't have an answer for this. Seems to him that this Mishnah is hard to understand. And our Gemara is in the middle of listing a number of different answers and trying to figure out why Rav Yochanan rejected them. So the Gemara is up to the suggestion where Rav Yochanan could have answered, and he could have said that the reason that Yehuda cannot do Yibum to Reuven's wife, even though she was Hutra v'Nesser v'Hutra, she was first permitted and then forbidden and then became permitted again. The reason is Gzeira. We're afraid if we allow her to get Yibum, then people may flip it and end up doing Yibum to the first wife. She'll be they'll end up doing Chalitza to the first wife. That is, she will get the Chalitza, and then people will do Yibum to Shimon's wife. That would be usher, because when Shimon's wife fell to Yibum, Reuven's wife had already fallen to Yibum. So Shimon's wife started off usher. She was always usher, and then became, her isser went away, but she stays usher. That's the halacha clearly. So Rav Yochanan would say that there's a gzeira, and that's why we would not allow Shimon's wife to get chalitza and then Reuven's wife to get Yibum, even though she was hutra v'nesser of a hutra, because people may get confused and do the opposite. They may do chalitza to Reuven's wife and then Yibum to Shimon's wife, who was just a nesser of a hutra. Someone says that can't be the pshat, because the Mishnah says clearly that there's no circumstance in which Yibum is permitted here. Now Rashi explains that if we would have made the gzeira, if that would have been the gzeira, then we would never have allowed people to initially do chalitza to Shimon's wife and then Yibum to Reuven's wife. However, if somebody had gone ahead, if Levi had gone ahead and done Yibum to Shimon's wife, then we would have allowed Yehuda to do Yibum to Reuven's wife, because now, after the fact, it's already permitted. What the Gemara says is that the Mishnah says velo misyabemes. It's clear there's no situation in which Yibum is permitted. So it couldn't be that this was the gzeira, because if it was just the gzeira, we would have allowed it after the fact if Levi had already gone ahead and done chalitza to Shimon's wife first. So there's another suggestion over here. Let's say that the reason that these two women are usher is not because of chosik ukaso, it's because of also the vatal mitzvah Yibum. If we allow one of them to do Yibum, then we're afraid that the other one will die before she gets chalitza, and then she wouldn't have to have Yibum or chalitza, because she would now we would be afraid that not that she would die, but that the last remaining brother would die, and then this woman would only be able to fall to Yibum to the man who did Yibum to the first woman who fell to Yibum, and now she's a sister of his wife, and she would therefore not require Yibum or Chalitza. That would be being Mevatel Mitzvahs Yibum. So maybe that's the reason that we don't allow him to do Yibum. We say he has to do Chalitza, so that we don't get in that situation where someone is freed without Yibum or Chalitza. And then, because of Gzeira, we would not allow anybody to do a Yibum. Because of that concern, we would say that nobody's allowed to do a Yibum under any circumstances, so we shouldn't have that. So why can't that be the Pshad? Why can't that be why the Mishnah says that there's no allowed Yibum here under any circumstances? So the Gemara says that it can't be because we're asking this kasha on Rav Yochanan, and Rav Yochanan is not concerned that Yehuda is going to die. He never has that concern. The Gemara says, well, maybe Rav Yochanan is talking the opinion of Rav Elazar. This is our third approach here for this daf. Maybe Rav Yochanan's answer is that this Mishnah is written by Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar holds is that if at any time a woman is usher, even if she started off mutter, she later becomes usher, even if that issur goes away, she stays usher. And therefore, he would disagree with this halacha that Rav Yochanan said earlier, because Rav Yochanan said in the opinion of the Chachamim, but Rav Elazar disagrees. So the Gemara says it can't be Rav Elazar because Rav Elazar is quoted later on in the Mishnah, and that shows that this part of the Mishnah is not Rav Elazar. So the Gemara says, okay, maybe the case is that neither of them fell first. Maybe the two women both fell to Yibum at the same time. Reuven and Shimon died simultaneously, and both women fell to Yibum simultaneously, and therefore both of them started off usher. Both of them were in achos zikukosa from the first moment of their Yibum. Now, although most people say that it's not possible that it happened at the same time, Rav Yossi Aglili does say that it is possible. So maybe this Mishnah is going according to Rav Yossi Aglili. Rav says it can't be Rav Yossi Aglili was a very minority opinion. It can't be that this Mishnah would be saying like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So Rav says, okay, maybe the case is that we didn't know which one fell to Yibum first. That's a logical thing to be. One of them fell to Yibum first. That one should really be permitted to do Yibum after a sister gets Chalitza, but we don't know who it is, and therefore neither of them are permitted to get Yibum. Both of them have to get Chalitza. But the problem with that approach is the next phrase in the Mishnah, which says that if both brothers, Levi and Yehuda, went and actually did Yibum, we would force them to separate from the woman that they did Yibum to. Now that doesn't make sense if you're saying that one of them definitely fell first and we didn't know which one. And the reason is as follows. The first brother to do Yibum, let's say Levi, he goes ahead and he does Yibum first. So we would for sure force to separate because he was for sure marrying the achos zikukaso. Even if his wife was the first one to fall to Yibum, the time that he did Yibum, she was already in achos zikukaso. The second woman had already fallen to Yibum. So he was for sure not permitted to stay married to her. He married an achos zikukaso. However, the second one is a suffix. Because the second one, the Zika of his sister is already gone by the Yibum that was performed by Levi. So let's say Levi, he does Yibum first. So he has to separate for sure, because he for sure did Yibum to an achos zikukaso. However, after that, Yehuda should then be able to stay married to the one that he did Yibum to, because it's possible that his wife was the first one to fall to Yibum. Her husband was the first to die. Therefore, at that time, she was not an achos zikukaso. Then, when Shimon died, she became an achos zikukaso, then she's usher. But then when Levi went and did Yibum to Shimon's wife, which we're going to say maybe that was Shimon's wife, maybe that was the one that fell to Yibum second, the one that Levi did Yibum to, then that Zika is broken, and now the one that Yehuda did Yibum to is not an achos zikukaso anymore. So therefore, she's a hutra of an esr of a chazer of a hutra. So it should be permitted, possibly. It's a suffix, because we don't know which woman Yehuda did Yibum to. Was that the first woman to fall to Yibum or the second one? However, in the case of a suffix, we know that the halachas, we wouldn't force them to separate. We've seen that earlier. Therefore, this phrase wouldn't make sense. And therefore, it can't be the case. The case of the Mishnah cannot be that they both fell to Yibum, and we don't know which one was first. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says there's no possible way of explaining this Mishnah. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to the next phrase in the Mishnah. The Gemara wants to say this is also facing the same kasha. The next phrase in the Mishnah says, let's say these two women who fell to Yibum, Reuven and Shimon's wives, one of them was an erva to Levi. Let's say one of them was Levi's mother-in-law. So Levi can't marry her. Levi has no zika to her. So Levi is mutter in Shimon's wife, because Shimon's wife is not the sister of his kuka. Shimon's wife is the sister of Levi's mother-in-law. That's not an Isser Korva, but because Levi's mother-in-law, who is one of the sisters, does not have a Zika, Levi is allowed to marry Shimon's wife. However, Yehuda does not have any relationship to either of them, so therefore both of them are Achos Zikukoso, and then both Aser to Yehuda. So now the Gemara says, why should they be both Aser to Yehuda? I have a simple scenario in which the second one is Mutter to Yehuda, and that's if Levi's mother-in-law was the first one to fall to Yibum, then Levi went and he did Yibum to the other one. So Levi's mother-in-law was Reuven's wife. She fell to Yibum first. She was therefore Mutter at that time. She was not on Achos Zikukoso. Then Shimon's wife, her sister, fell to Yibum. Now, Reuven's wife, who was Levi's mother-in-law, became an Achos Zikukoso, but Levi's allowed to do Yibum to Shimon's wife because she's not an Achos Zikukoso to him because Levi is the son-in-law of Reuven's wife. So therefore, Levi can go and do Yibum to Shimon's wife. Now once that happens, there's no longer any Zika there. That's broken. So Reuven's initial wife goes back to being Mutter to Yehuda. She started off Mutter. She, in the middle, was Aser because she was Achos Zikukoso. And once Levi did Yibum to Shimon's wife, she went back to being Mutter. So let Yehuda do Yibum to her. What's the problem? So Gemara says, so the case that we're talking about here simply is where Levi's mother-in-law was the second one to fall to Yibum. Levi's mother-in-law was Shimon's wife. Therefore, when Levi did Yibum, he was doing Yibum to Reuven's wife, who fell to Yibum first, and the only one who Shimon could possibly deal with would be Shimon's wife. Shimon's wife was the second one to fall to Yibum, and she started off Aser. At the time she fell to Yibum, she was already in Achos Zikukoso directly. Okay, next thing Gemara speaks about the Machlokes, whether or not there is a Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, if they went ahead and did Yibum, if they're allowed to stay married to them. We've seen before that it's Aser, but that is a Machlokes, whether or not Beis Shammai argues on that. So more quotes a Bryce on the subject. So more says as follows. Rabbi Elazar says it's a Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and Abba Shaul says it's also Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but they have the opinions reversed. Rabbi Elazar says Beis Shammai says they're allowed to stay married, and Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to stay married. Abba Shaul says, Beis Hillel says you are allowed to stay married, and Beis Shammai says they're not allowed to stay married. So it's reversed. But then the Brisa says that Rabbi Shimon holds that they're allowed to stay married. Someone says, hold on a second. Rabbi Shimon can't be saying his own opinion because he would not take sides in the Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. He was a much later generation than them. So he must be quoting one of the two opinions. And he must be quoting Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai. He's quoting one or the other. So which one is it? When he says allowed to stay married, if he's quoting Beis Hillel, so then he's saying Abba Shaul's version. And if he's quoting Beis Shammai, then he's saying Rabbi Elazar's version. Either way, what is he doing saying his own opinion? He should say either like Rabbi Elazar or like Abba Shaul. So Gemara says no, what he means to say is that nobody argues. He means to say that everybody agrees that they're allowed to stay married and there's no issue in this case. Alright, now we go on to the next case. The next case was where we had said, like we discussed earlier, that one of them was in Erva. One of them was in Erva, let's say one of them was Levi's mother-in-law. One of the two women to fall to Yibum from Reuven or Shimon's was Levi's mother-in-law. So that one then is not a Zika, and her sister is not an Achos Zikukoso to Levi, and therefore she is Mutter. Now, if so this is what's called in a earlier parak, this is called Achosa Yevimta o Chaletes o Misyabemes. That means the sister, let's say Shimon's wife, is allowed to either Yibum or Chalitza with Levi because Reuven's wife, who's the sister, is not a Zika, she's an Erva. So Gemara says, we've already seen this halacha earlier, why is it repeated here? Why do we need both of the cases? And the Gemara says, because both of them, I may think, should have a Gzeira D'Rabbanan to aser it. In our case, there are two brothers, there's Levi and Yehuda. The Achosu Shehi Yevimta that is Mutter is only to Levi, because one of the sisters is only an Erva to Levi, not to Yehuda. Therefore, Yehuda is also married both of them, and they're both an Achosu Kukaso to Yehuda. So on the one hand, that may make me say that I should make a Gzeira. I should say that I'm afraid that Yehuda will get confused, and he'll see that Levi did Yibum, and he'll think that he could do Yibum, not realizing that that's because Levi had one of the sisters was a Erva to him, and therefore the other one is not an Achosu Kukaso. According to Yehuda, that's not true. in the case of Yehuda, that's not true. So on the one hand, I may say that that's a potential gzera I should make. On the other hand, I may say I'm not concerned about a gzera of Yehuda getting confused. I'm concerned about other cases of the same phenomena happening and people getting confused because they saw that Levi did Yibum and they may think that they can also do Yibum. Now, in our case, which we had originally mentioned, there is no Yehuda. So, therefore, people will get confused. They'll see, hey, this case here, Levi did Yibum, and so why can't I do Yibum? They won't realize that it was because Levi was an erva to one of the sisters. However, in our case, in our Mishnah, maybe there's no gzera, and that's because there's a Yehuda that proves that it's not such a simple halacha. They see that Levi was able to do Yibum, but they see that Yehuda was not able to do Yibum. So they'll look into it and they'll realize it must be because Levi had one of the sisters was an erva to him. So therefore, it's possible that there's more of a reason in a case of two brothers, Levi and Yehuda, to make a gzera from Levi to Yehuda. It's also possible that there's less of a reason to make a gzera because I won't get confused from Levi to a next case because I can see that Yehuda proves that there's no issue. Therefore, I have to list both cases, both when there are two brothers alive remaining and both when there's only one brother alive remaining. Okay, now the next phrase in the Mishnah was that if one of the women is not an erva to Levi, but she's an iser mitzvah or an iser kedusha, and she's a lav d'oraisa to Levi, either almona kohen gadol, gusha to a kohen hedyed, or a mamzer, or one of these things. So in that case, that's not enough to make the other woman mutter to Levi. So let's say Reuven's wife is an iser lav, kedusha or mitzvah to Levi. That does not mean that Levi could do Yibum to Shimon's wife, because she is not in achos erva, she is in achos iser mitzvah or iser kedusha, and that doesn't take off the fact that she's in achos zikukasa. It doesn't take off the zika of the iser mitzvah, and therefore Shimon's wife is still in achos zikukasa. What's the chiddush of this? We've already seen that an iser kedusha or an iser mitzvah is not enough to break a zika. We've already said that. We've already said that they require chalitza, and they don't require yibum. So therefore this shouldn't break this zika either. Why would I think that it does? So the Gemara says, no, I may think that it's strong enough to break the iser achos zikukaso. This is not really a zika here. The whole problem for Shimon's wife is that she's achos zikukaso. So maybe it's enough to limit the zika of Reuven's wife to Levi, so that Shimon's wife will no longer be considered an achos zikukaso because that zika is wounded and damaged. The chiddush here is that no, since there is a zika and the midoraisa, they are chayav in yibum, even though there is an iser mitzvah. Therefore, we don't say that Shimon's wife is allowed to do yibum to Levi, and that is still a chiddush. Right, now the Gemara goes on to the next case in the Mishnah, which is where both brothers had one of the women was an erva to each one alternately. So that's, let's say Reuven's wife was an erva to Levi, and Shimon's wife was an erva to Yehuda. So the case here is that Levi is allowed to do yibum to the woman who's not an erva to him because she's not an achos zikukaso, being that her sister is an erva, and Yehuda is allowed to do yibum to the other woman who is not an erva to him because she's also not an achos zikukaso. So when it says, what's the chiddush of this? This is a repetition of the same concept. What's the difference if there's one brother who has an erva, and if they're both arayos, what should be the issue over here? So it says again, the issue is, would I make a gzeira over here? There's a possible reason to think that I should make a gzeira here more, or that I should make it here gzeira less than in the standard cases. Over here, you have two brothers. So I may think, since both of them are doing yibum, I should make a gzeira. I won't learn to another case, when if it happens again, and they're not ervas, I won't learn that they can't do yibum there, because I see here they're allowed to do yibum, why can't they do yibum there? I don't have the one brother who's proving that there's something that he can't do yibum. On the other hand, I may say, no, this is stronger. Here you have both brothers have to have an erva here, and they're both not doing yibum to the other's erva. They're both only doing yibum to the sister of the erva for them. They can't switch women. So therefore, that proves they each prove to the other one that they have to do yibum dafka to the case where there's an achos erva, and not to the other one. So that is potentially a proof either way. Okay, now the Mishnah ends off and it says Zuhi Sha'amra. This is the classic case of Achoso Shehi Yevimto, where even though you have two sisters falling to Yibam, one is the sister of a woman who's falling to Yibam, but she's an erva, and therefore this woman is not considered to be an achos. Zikukoso, because she is the sister of an erva falling to Yibam, not of someone with a healthy zika. So Gemara says, what is the reason to say this is the case? What are we excluding exactly to say that does not count as the case? So Gemara first wants to say, maybe it's to tell me that an Isser Mitzvah doesn't help. Only if an Isser Erva helps. Isser Mitzvah and an Isser Arayos, in Isser Mitzvah and Isser Kedusha does not help. So Gemara says, well, why would I need to tell me that? I already said that in the case where one of them was an Erva. Why do I have to say it again in the case where both of them was an Erva, to say only this, and to show that it wouldn't be true if both of them were Isser Mitzvah? Why do I need that? There is no extra Chiddush in that. Says the Gemara, same answer. When there's only one, I may potentially think that there are Gzeras. So I may think that you could learn that there's Gzera to the other one, to the other case. However, if there's no second case, I wouldn't need to make Gzera, and therefore I would allow the Isser Mitzvah to count as an Isser Erva and to pater her sister that she's no longer an Achos Zikukasa. And of course the same thing would be true the other way. If I only had the case of the two, I would think that proves that there's no Gzera to a different case if it happens again, because I see that one of them has to do Chalitza. However, if I only had the case of two and not, if I only had the one, then it wouldn't prove anything. Says the Gemara now, referring back to the Mishnah where we had the case of the four brothers married to two sisters, where the two sisters fall to Yibam. So you have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and the two sisters are falling to Yibam, to Levi and Yehuda from Reuven and Shimon, that each one is an erva to one of the brothers, not the same one. So Gemara says that erva could work out in all 15 cases of our Mishnah. Meaning the relationship between the two women falling to Yibam and Levi and Yehuda could be, they could both be the daughter, one could be the daughter of Levi, one could be the daughter of Yehuda, they could be the granddaughter of Levi and Yehuda. All the cases, all the 15 cases in the first Mishnah in the Masechta, all the 15 arayos that could fall to Yibam could exist in this scenario. That's what Rav and Rav Chia said. So at the Gemara, there are certain Amoraim that said that some they can't be part of the list. So Yehuda said, first of all, the first 6 can't be part of the list, because the only way to have it work out that they should be the daughters of Levi and Yehuda is if there was an anusa, if there was a rape that happened that gave birth to a daughter, and the Mishnah is not talking about a case like that. Now, even though granddaughter and wife's granddaughter could exist, because they're all included in the name daughter, so all 6 of the daughter cases are taken out of this. Now, why could it be that you can't have this case without it being the daughter of a rape? So the Gemara says, very simple. You have Reuven and Shimon's wives are falling to Levi and Yehuda. And you want to say that Reuven and Shimon's wives, one was a daughter of Levi, and one was a daughter of Yehuda. But you want to make them be sisters. So how could they be sisters if they had different fathers? One was daughter of Levi, one was daughter of Yehuda. So obviously they were daughters of the same mother. But how could they be daughters of the same mother? That would mean that Levi and Yehuda were both married to the same woman. That can't be. You're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, and there's no Tfisas Kedushin in that. So Levi and Yehuda couldn't be married to the same woman. It would have to be that they have the same mother without marriage. It would have to be that they were an Achos Anusaso. They were a Bas Anusaso. That Levi was Ma'anis, a woman, and gave birth to a daughter. And then Yehuda was Ma'anis, the same woman, and gave birth to a daughter. Those two daughters are sisters. One is the daughter of Levi, one is the daughter of Yehuda, and then Reuven and Shimon married those two girls. They died, and those two girls fell to Yibam to their fathers and their sisters from their mother, who were both the anusas of their two fathers. That's the only way to work it out. Since we don't want to talk about a case which is an anusa, we take this case out of the Mishnah, and therefore we take all 6 anusa cases out of the Mishnah. That's what Rav Yehuda does. Now Abai says, no, we could put those in, at least there's a way to work it out. We have to take out the case of Achos, of Eishes Ach Shel Hoya Ba'olamo, because Eishes Ach Shel Hoya Ba'olamo only works according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and I don't want to be discussing a machlokes. Now, why is it only possible to work out according to Rabbi Shimon? So the Gemara explains, the Gemara quotes from Safra, who explains the entire case at length. Rav Shimon is of the opinion that if an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo, that is, a brother was born after the death of the original brother, he's only calling Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo and has no Yibum and is usher on that brother's wife if he was born before that woman got Yibum from a different brother. If, however, she got Yibum first, then this brother's mutter. That's the only way that you could work it out, that one woman is mutter to Levi and usher to Yehuda, and one woman is mutter to Yehuda and usher to Levi. There's no other way to work it out, because according to the opinion of the Chachamim, that it doesn't make a difference if he was born before Yibum or after Yibum. Either way, they're usher, so then they will all be usher to Yehuda. There's no way, because Yehuda is Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo on all of them. There's no way to make them mutter to him. So the Gemara works out the case. We have 6 brothers. In this case, you're going to have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda who are all alive at the same time. And as we said before, Reuven and Shimon are married to 2 sisters. They die without children. Those 2 women fall to Yibum to Levi and Yehuda. But it works in the following order. Reuven dies first. His wife falls to Yibum to Levi. She falls to Yibum to all 3 brothers, but she falls to Yibum. Then, before Levi does anything, Yisachar is born. So now Yisachar is an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo. She's usher to this woman. Then Levi does Yibum. Levi is later going to die, and this woman's going to fall to Yibum, and she's an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo to Yisachar. However, she's going to be mutter to Zevulun, because Zevulun is going to be born after Levi did Yibum already. So this woman is therefore usher to Yisachar because of Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo, he was born before she got Yibum, and mutter to Zevulun, who was born after she got Yibum. Now what about the second wife? So the second wife was Shimon's wife. Shimon died before Yehuda was born. Then Yehuda was born before Shimon died before Zevulun was born. So Zevulun is an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo. Zevulun is Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo. He was born before Yehuda did Yibum to Shimon's wife. Therefore, he's a real Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo. Then Shimon's wife, then Shimon himself, then Yehuda died. So Shimon's former wife, who's now Yehuda's wife, falls to Yibum to Zevulun. Because Zevulun was born before she died, so before he died, so Zevulun is because Zevulun was born before Yehuda did Yibum. Therefore, Zevulun is an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo, and Zevulun is usher. However, Yisachar is not usher, because Yisachar is not an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo at all. Yisachar was born before Shimon ever died in the first place. Therefore, there's no Isser Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo on him. So this is only going to work out according to Rabbi Shimon's opinion, and we don't want to say a case which is going to be a machlokes. That's how the Gemara says, according to Abaye, that case should be left out of the list of things that could work out in this case from the 15 arayos of the Mishnah. Asks the Gemara, why do I need Yehuda in this case? Yehuda didn't have to do Yibum to Shimon's wife. It works out perfectly without that. You had Levi doing Yibum to Reuven's wife, and Yisachar was an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo, and then you could have Shimon's wife falling directly from Shimon to Yisachar and Zevulun, and it's an Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo without Yehuda having to do Yibum in between. Yisachar is not Shel Hayeh B'Olamo because Yisachar and Shimon were alive at the same time. Zevulun is a Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo because he was born after Shimon died. Why do you need Yehuda in there? Someone says you need Yehuda because you want to be able to say a case of Itzara. You want to be able to say that Levi and Yehuda both had a second wife. Their second wife, unrelated to each other, are both at Tzaras, Eish Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo, and therefore both of them were patur from Yibum to Yisachar and Zevulun also. That's what we wanted to say, that there was a Yehuda, and therefore Yehuda had a Tzara, and Yehuda had a second wife, and that was a Tzara of the Zach Shel Hayeh B'Olamo, came from Shimon, and she's patur as well. So Gemara says, but what about tzaras tzara? How do you have a case of tzaras tzara? Gemara says, no problem. Add in 2 more brothers. These 2 tzaros went and married those 2 brothers. They died also. They had a second pair of wife each. They each had a second wife. And that's a tzaras tzara of this case of Eshach Shloher Ba'olamo. And therefore they would be patur from Yibam as well because of tzaras Eshach Shloher Ba'olamo. Okay, this concludes the Gemara on our previous Mishnah. Now we get to our next Mishnah. This Mishnah discusses a very similar case that we've been discussing in the previous Mishnah, but now it introduces the opinion of Reb Shimon. So here we have the case, and this time we have only 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. Reuven and Shimon died without children. Both women fall to Shimon, to Levi. And these women could also be not only sisters, they could be a mother and a daughter, a mother and a granddaughter, a mother and a granddaughter through the son. There's many different types of relationships to this where this would apply. All of these cases, the Rabbanan would say that they get chalitza not yibam because they're achos zikukaso, or bas zikukaso, or aim zikukaso, or granddaughter of a zikukaso, grandmother zikukaso. All these cases we've seen before that the halacha is chalitza. Now Rav Shimon disagrees. Rav Shimon says they don't require chalitza. You can't do yibam, and they don't require chalitza. So Gemara explains. Rav Shimon has a drasha. It says, a woman onto her sister should not take to be tzaros. It means if they're entering a situation where they're both being tzaros, they're both coming to Yibam together, so they're both in a tzaros creating situation, you can't marry either of them. There is no lekicha in either of them. There is no mitzvah Yibam in either of them. They're totally patur from Yibam. So deraisa, a case like this, and achos zikukaso, or aim zikukaso, bas zikukaso, and so on, all are patur from Yibam deraisa. Now, the Mishnah continues, and the Mishnah says that if one of them was an Isser Mitzvah or an Isser Kedusha, choletzas v'lo misibam, as it gets chalitza and not Yibam. So Gemara says, what do we need that for? We've already seen this repeated many times. The Gemara actually is asking on a middle case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if one of them was a Isser Erva, so that Isser Erva doesn't get a Zika, and the other one has a regular Zika. So Gemara says again, why do we have this? We've seen this halacha a number of times already. So Gemara says here is for the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. You may think, according to Rabbi Shimon, I should for sure make Xera, because the Isser that is potentially being encountered here, if we do this wrong, is the Nishas Daraisa of Eshesach, because there's no Yibam Daraisa, so it's an Eshesach. And therefore, it comes to tell me that there's no Xera, and therefore you're allowed to do it.